people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The continued fallout after this weekend's big upset loss for Canelo Alvarez. Former IBF super middleweight champion Caleb Plant let off a cryptic string of tweets stating, I think a lot of you silly motherfuckers really think when I asked him, I'm pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Y'all think I was looking for approval.
Hey.
But I already know I'm a great fighter, not a good fighter. He thought it was going to be a cakewalk. So when it wasn't, I wanted to hear him say it.
Him who?
Who's him?
Well, the guy that knocked you out?
He says sarcasm, like, I'm pretty good, huh? AKA, yeah, you thought this shit was going to be easy. He was standing up in the corner during the wrestling.
What the fuck is Caleb gloating about?
I don't know. I guess that because Canelo Alvarez didn't look good this past weekend, didn't look himself, I think Caleb is taking that as a precedence to gloat.
Gloat about what? You got knocked the fuck out.
No, I was asking because I already knew the answer, not because I didn't know. Y'all funny as fuck if you think different. I'm pretty good, huh? Like I said, AKA, yeah, motherfucker, you better use the stool because you're not about to Chavez Jr. me and stand up the whole fight.
All right, Sugar Ray Charles, if that's how you saw it.
It's cringeworthy, to say the least, seeing Caleb Plant, who's been pretty quiet as of late. He hasn't said much since he got stopped. This is the most we've actually heard from him.
What it took for Bivol, a light heavyweight, to beat Canelo for you to find your voice?
You know, in case you guys aren't aware, in case you missed it, it was Dimitri Bivol, a light heavyweight, an unbeaten one in his prime. It was Dimitri that beat Canelo Alvarez, not Caleb Plant, and not anybody else. It was Dimitri that did that. The guy that, going into this fight, didn't get the same vote of confidence in some circles that Caleb got. There were actually people picking Caleb Plant to beat Canelo Alvarez, whereas because Dimitri's not an American fighter, not American-based, a lot of people wrote him off immediately. That goes to show you how...
More American xenophobia.
You know, a lot of American fight fans think every American fighter is Sugar Ray Leonard. A lot of American fight fans still think that America, in the sport of boxing, is the center of the universe when nothing could be further from the truth. This ain't the 80s and this ain't the 90s. Boxing is a world sport, more so now than it ever was in the past. And Caleb got a vote of confidence in some circles that Dimitri Bivol did not get ahead of this fight. I myself identified Caleb as a guy who's on borrowed time.
Yeah.
You know, he's going to get stopped. Whereas with Dimitri, I told you, at minimum, I told you that this thing is going to go 12 rounds because I don't know if Canelo can put a dent in this guy. He can probably out-volume him, out-fight him, and edge his way to a decision, but stopping him as easily as he stopped Caleb?
No, it's not gonna be easy.
Caleb said, I'm in a whole different stratosphere than him, and you'll respect me as such. And who him is? I mean, who's he talking about? Who's him?
Him who?
Canelo, the guy that knocked you out? Or the guy that just beat the guy that knocked you out?
Does he know how fucking stupid he sounds saying this shit?
Canelo must have really hit this guy hard. That's the only way I can reconcile these comments from Caleb Plant. He says he's in a different stratosphere. Yes, perhaps he is after getting knocked smooth out. Maybe he is in a different stratosphere. I wouldn't give him any kind of odds to beat the likes of Dimitri Bivol, Artur Beterbiev, or really anyone of note at 175 pounds. I've always felt that Caleb, he's a very neat and tidy, pure boxer, but he lacks the durability to go all the way.
Pipe down, Malibu's most wanted. You got knocked out.
You know, I'm not kidding. Caleb Plant, ahead of that Canelo Alvarez fight, got more of a vote of confidence than Dimitri Bivol, even though Dimitri actually has a more robust resume than Caleb Plant does. He fought Joe Smith Jr., who currently reigns as the light heavyweight division's WBO champion. He fought John Pascal, who after dropping a decision to Dimitri Bivol, Dimitri, who handled him handily, that same John Pascal gave Marcus Brown his first professional loss. That same John Pascal beat Badu Jack. Dimitri Bivol, in spite of having a better, more robust resume than Caleb Plant and having reigned as a champion longer than Caleb, he didn't get the same vote of confidence from the Americans Americans that Caleb got. It seems to me like Caleb got the vote of confidence that he got simply because he was American and because he was with an American-based promoter, as if any of that made Caleb a better fighter.
I said it here on the channel. He's going to get stopped late. He's going to get knocked the fuck out.
For all the American xenophobia you see in the sport of boxing, Caleb Plant got knocked the fuck out. Dimitri Bivol didn't. In fact, ahead of that fight, I told you, Dimitri Bivol, he's a potential banana skin. While it might be very hard to bet against the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport leading up to that fight, while it might be hard to do that, I got the sense that Dimitri is at least more durable and more challenging than little old Caleb Plant.
But he didn't get the vote of confidence that Caleb did, and that goes to show you how much those people know about boxing.
They didn't actually know what was in Dimitri Bivol's resume. The ones that did were very dismissive of it. Never mind that he's a naturally bigger guy that deals with naturally bigger guys than Caleb Plant. That's just boxing. That's boxing these days. Boxing in a nutshell.
Caleb Plant literally got more of a vote of confidence from the Americans than Dimitri did.
Bunch of fucking bozos. Never mind that Caleb Plant is only now finding his courage after Dimitri found the success that Caleb himself could not, having shared the ring with the same guy. Well, let me remind you, Caleb, when you fought Canelo, he knocked you the fuck out. You're not Dimitri Bivol. When he eats, you don't shit, and his success ain't yours.
Dimitri Bivol wins a fight at light heavyweight where you don't even campaign and you find your voice.
That's convenient. This is the fallout as a result of Canelo Alvarez dropping that decision to Dimitri Bivol. There are a lot of people right now, they're trying to kick him while he's down. Elsewhere in the boxing cosmos, the fallout from this past weekend's action has certainly inspired Oscar to speak up. Oscar De La Hoya, former promoter of Canelo Alvarez, who says, Canelo, it isn't too late yet to switch back to the best promoter. And what tenuous association Oscar is attempting to make between Canelo Alvarez's...
What association is there between Canelo losing a fight and who's promoting him?
There's a lot of divisiveness when it comes to boxing, and that goes without saying, inside and outside the ring. Outside of the ring in this instance, because Oscar seems to think that Canelo Alvarez's current predicament has something to do with promotion and who his promoter is, when in reality, all that happened to Canelo Alvarez was he lost a fight to a naturally bigger guy.
Yeah.
A skilled guy, same way he's a skilled guy,
Yeah.
but a naturally bigger guy, which made him that much more difficult to contend with. No more, no less. I mean, that's what happened. He got outsized.
It's not an indictment on him.
It's not an indictment against his legacy, his career, who he's fought so far, and what he attempted to do in the light heavyweight division. It's not really an indictment.
It's a badge of honor if it's anything.
Let's make this clear. The guy's taking time out to belittle and berate Canelo Alvarez. The guy's taking time out to belittle and berate Dimitri Bivol before that fight and hereafter. Those guys don't want to see the likes of Jermall Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, or David Benavidez venture north of 168 pounds. For all they've got to say about little old Canelo Alvarez for trying to make it as a light heavyweight, they know the guys they support can't make it.
All three of those guys got bigger frames than Canelo Alvarez.
Was never big for middleweight, never big for super middleweight, much less at light heavyweight. Whereas you got guys 6'2", 6'3", and David Benavidez who don't dare venture north of super middleweight because they know they might find a similar or worse fate at 175 pounds to the fate that Canelo Alvarez...
If it's easy, you go up there and do it.
Well, we're trashing Canelo.
Yeah, Dimitri Bivol beat the main man.
That's what Dimitri Bivol did, and that should be an added incentive for these other guys, your Charlo, your Andrade, your Benavidez, to take him on, to upstage Canelo Alvarez, to find the success that he did not find so they can add to their marquee value, add to their profiles. A fight with Dimitri is certainly a better fight than the fights they've been having with the fighters they've been fighting. Who's really excited to see David Benavidez take on David Lemieux? Who's really excited to see Jermall Charlo take on Maciej Suliecki? Who's really excited to see any of that shit?
The guys berating Canelo Alvarez right now won't advocate for those fighters to fight that guy.
Because they know underneath it all, they know those fighters won't finish that fight on their feet the same way that Canelo Alvarez did. The only reason he finished that fight on his feet is because he really is that good a fighter.
Any other middleweight and any other super middleweight gets sat on their back pocket.
Any other 160, any other 168 pounder. Not only do they lose that fight...
Oh yeah, they'd lose to Dimitri and some of them would get knocked out.
Better still, Oscar De La Hoya, Canelo Alvarez's former promoter, he's got his own brand of divisiveness. He's more or less making it seem as if Canelo Alvarez lost this past weekend for some reason other than he was fighting a naturally bigger guy. I mean, this has absolutely nothing to do with promoters or promotion. Canelo simply bit off more than he could chew. And Golden Boy Promotions, Oscar,
I think what Oscar's saying is that he never would have put Canelo in that fight.
if Canelo Alvarez were still a Golden Boy Promotions fighter. I think that's more or less what Oscar's getting at. But when you think about it, yeah, Golden Boy Promotions probably wouldn't have put Canelo Alvarez in there with a light heavyweight, but they probably wouldn't have put him in there with all these other champions at super middleweight either. At Golden Boy Promotions, I happen to think that Canelo wouldn't have made the history he just made in the last 10 or 11 months, the last year or so, if he was still a Golden Boy Promotions fighter, because look at what they did with Jaime Munguia. They pulled him out of that Carlos Adames fight. They pulled him out of that Jermall Charlo fight. They pulled him out of all of that. And now his career is stagnating.
Daniel Jacobs' fight fell apart.
Oscar De La Hoya is trying to make this about promoters and promotion, though in truth, Canelo Alvarez made the decision to fight Dimitri Bivol. That was his choice, and the only reason he lost is because Dimitri's a naturally bigger, more durable, and skilled boxer. No more, no less. This ain't about promoters, and this ain't about promotion. And the whole reason Oscar's doing this is because Golden Boy Promotions really has been in a bad way since Canelo Alvarez left them, or I should say, since the people at Golden Boy lost Canelo's trust.
Remember, it was Canelo's decision to get the fuck out of there.
Canelo Alvarez was the captain of his own ship at Golden Boy Promotions, and he's still the captain of his own ship here and now. It's not Eddie Hearn making decisions for him. It's not that dynamic, and I think Canelo trusts Eddie a lot more than he trusts Oscar, since Oscar wants to make this about promoters and promotion.
He's desperate.
He's still begging Canelo Alvarez to come back.
He's desperate.
And just in keeping with the theme of this weekend's fallout, Chris Eubank Jr. immediately took to Twitter saying, "Well, Triple G, looks like you're going to need a new dance partner now that Canelo Alvarez has been dethroned. I'm ready to tango, baby. Let's get it on this summer."
Another guy who's desperate.
Just about as cringeworthy as Caleb Plant attempting to gloat over a fight he didn't win.
Yeesh.
Just as desperate as Oscar, Chris Eubank Jr. is attempting to crash the party, inject himself into that conversation, be a part of it, because we all know what the plan was. The plan was for Canelo Alvarez to take on Dimitri Bivol, and if he wins, he goes straight into a Golovkin trilogy in September. But now, there may be alterations to that plan, since there are now talks for a rematch between Canelo Alvarez and Dimitri Bivol. Boxers Ben Shalom has said they are talking to Top Rank about potentially making Eubank Alimkhanuli versus Chris Eubank Jr. for the WBO middleweight world title. If Demetrius Andrade vacates, he also named Liam Smith as a possible opponent for Eubank Jr.
You know, both those guys are from Kazakhstan. Gennady Golovkin, Eubank Alimkhanuli, they're both from Kazakhstan. I'd pick both of them to beat the fuck out of Chris Eubank Jr. Chris obviously wants the bigger name, the Gennady Golovkin fight. He just so happens to be a more well-known fighter than Eubank Alimkhanuli. I think that goes without saying. He also happens to be this division's unified champion, so there's two alphabet titles as opposed to just the one that would be on the line, could be on the line in an Alimkhanuli fight. I don't favor Chris Eubank Jr. to win either of those fights. He got off to a very strong start with Liam Williams, but he wasn't all business. He fucked off He did.
several rounds. Fucked off.
He did.
He didn't close the show, even though he got off to a strong start. He didn't. Chris Eubank Jr. isn't all business, as they say, whereas Eubank Alimkhanuli and Gennady Golovkin, characteristically, they are. They are all business.
Chris Eubank Jr. won't have time to showboat and prance around the ring with those boys.
Doing his best impersonation of Roy Jones Jr., Diet Roy Jones Jr. That won't fly with those guys. There's a possibility, a genuine possibility, that Gennady Golovkin might face Chris Eubank Jr., depending on what his promotional situation is. We don't know for sure if he still is with Matchroom. That Ryota Murata fight was the fourth fight of what is supposed to be a six-fight deal, assuming it still even is a six-fight deal. The deal he entered into with DAZN, his last fight wasn't necessarily a Matchroom promotion, even though in this part of the world you would have seen the fight by way of DAZN. It's a little murky. It's a little unclear what Golovkin's network and promotional situation is at this time, though it's safe to assume he must still be in bed with DAZN if the plan was to match him against Canelo. Is he at liberty to cross over to Sky Sports and Boxer for a Chris Eubank Jr. fight? There's a question there. There's also a question as to whether or not he's actually going to do that, or will Canelo Alvarez opt to proceed as planned and face him anyway, in spite of coming off a loss. Face him anyway at 168 pounds for the super middleweight undisputed championship in September.
I mean, the only way it happens is if Canelo Alvarez doesn't face Triple G in September.
And Golovkin actually is at liberty to box on another platform under another banner. That's the only way it happens. That's the only way it materializes, a fight between Gennady and Chris. That being said, Chris might have to actually earn his money. Eubank Alimkhanuli fight is a more realistic fight. It's a fight where there could be a world title on the line. There very well could. Chris Eubank Jr. would be the A side. I imagine such a fight would take place in the United Kingdom, where it does the best business, because neither Chris Eubank Jr. or Eubank Alimkhanuli, neither one of those two guys are big ticket sellers in America. Neither one of those two guys are familiar faces, familiar names. But in the United Kingdom, Chris Eubank Jr.'s name does have some marquee value.
The best place to do the fight is in the UK.
Eubank is going to be in action later on this month on the 21st, about 1 or 2 weeks from now, against unbeaten Danny Dignam. I think he's going to knock out Danny Dignam. That's what I think is going to happen. And, beyond that, presumably that's when you do the Chris Eubank Jr. fight. That's when you would do it.
I'm actually okay with either fight.
I think both guys beat the fuck out of Chris Eubank Jr., that's what I think. I wouldn't mind seeing Golovkin take him on, because Chris is only calling out Golovkin now because it's a very opportune time to fight him, at least in Chris Eubank Jr.'s eyes. Now that he's not what he used to be, he's 40 years old. And, Chris figures that he's more human, but I don't think he's human enough to where Chris can beat him. I'd still favor Golovkin to win that fight. If it's not Golovkin that he ends up fighting, if it's Eubank, hard-punching southpaw, also from Kazakhstan, I think Eubank gives him what for. I think he knocks out Chris, too.
One fight is worth a lot more money than the other.
Though both fights could very well be title fights. They also mentioned Liam Beefy Smith, former WBO junior middleweight champion, who was in action not but 2 weeks ago on the undercard of Taylor versus Serrano. He stopped former WBO welterweight champion Jesse Vargas. Would be a tougher task and a tougher ask to stop the likes of Chris Eubank Jr. You could perhaps favor Chris to win that fight.
Beefy's a fun fighter to watch, but middleweight really is Chris's neck of the woods more than it's Beefy's.
That does seem a more realistic fight than a Golovkin fight. Somewhat more realistic than an Alimkhanuli fight. The Alimkhanuli fight is realistic, but it's risky. And I wonder how Chris's handlers feel about those risks. It would be for a world title.
But that fight ain't as winnable as a Liam Smith fight.
And it all depends on what Canelo Alvarez decides to do next. That's what it's all contingent upon. If Canelo decides to proceed as planned and fight Golovkin anyway in September, that takes him off the table for Chris Eubank Jr. And, then Chris is going to have to decide between a Eubank Alimkhanuli fight and a Liam Smith fight. Liam Smith is more well-known in the United Kingdom than Eubank is, but fighting Liam Smith won't be for an alphabet title. And at this point, Chris Eubank Jr., who's never been a full-fledged champion before,
he really ought to be fighting for an alphabet title.
I get the sense he'd fancy the Smith fight more than the Alimkhanuli fight. We'll just have to wait and see what happens.